Here we are at the Holliston Senior Center, and today's presentation is about the new real estate rules and how to potentially save money when you're selling your home. And I'd like to thank Laura Paramensky for having us today, and as the Assistant Director, and Lisa Brachetto, the Executive Director here. Hope I pronounced those names right. I've been in Holliston here before doing another seminar. I'll just mention that's coming up again in a month or so, so check in for that if you like. That one is called Downsizing and Selling from Daunting to Done, because downsizing is the hardest part of selling a house. We all have too much stuff, right? So that one's coming up in a month or so, and I think you'll enjoy that if you do attend. Again, today is about the new real estate rules, and I'm just curious, who's, by a show of hands, who's heard about this real estate change on the radio or television, anything? Okay, so everybody's kind of heard about it, and that's great. I'm going to give a little bit of just a brief background on me and why I'm qualified to talk on this topic. I've been in real estate now for about 25 years, but my background is technology before that and mortgages. So I came through the mortgage door to real estate after doing some flips and rehabs. And I really enjoy real estate, but my core competency is in channel marketing. So to me, finding listings involves finding people with older homes, so it makes sense to work with seniors and families in transition. And since I've begun, I've turned from a young puppy into a senior myself. And this is my credentials right here. So people ask, why do I wear the cowboy hat? Well, you know, a lot of people come to seminars and do them. And it's a wonderful time to be a senior. And there are a lot of resources for seniors. And I belong to several organizations who get together to share information about how they serve their customers. People like assisted and independent living locations, which are very popular these days, and also stay-at-home home health care, and downsizing people who help you when you have to move things. A lot of people like that. Everybody's in the room together. There's 40 people. Everybody stands up and does 30 seconds and sits down. You can't remember who was who. So I started wearing the hat, and I would say the realtor's under the hat. And they said, you know, that's a good gig. You got to do that because it's easy to remember you. So I do it at the senior centers and when I'm presenting. And people say to me afterwards, when I call them and say, you know, remember we did a seminar and I'm just following up, did you like it? Are there any questions? And they say to me, I don't remember the seminar. Well, do you remember the guy with the hat? So hopefully you remember, but it's hot under here. It's a winter hat. Anybody's curious, it's a Stetson. It's more of a winter hat, so I'll probably be taking it on as we get through the presentation. Okay, so again, about the new real estate rules. First of all, I assume most of you are still homeowners, but can I have it by a show of hands? How many are still homeowners? Okay, for the audience out there, that was everyone. So everyone here is still a homeowner, and it appears that most of you are seniors. I'm not saying you are for sure, but it appears that way. So this is very interactive. If you've got any questions, let me know. As I said, I've been a realtor for a long time. My office is in Framingham on Route 9 in the Meadows building. I'm with Keller Williams Real Estate. Keller Williams is the largest realtor in the country, or actually in the world, by head count. And they have many, many offices. So one of the things I do is, by focusing on seniors, is I have a team of people that also focus on seniors with me. And that gives us coverage and gives us extra arms and legs to help out with things. So we'll explain more about that later, but I have been a realtor for a long time, and that's why, to me, this is an important topic. So for a long time, and again, feel free to jump in with questions anytime you'd like. And I'm going to get to the first screen here too while we're doing this. So, okay. What I want you to learn from this seminar is that, or take away, is that you'll have confidence when you do go to sell your home, or if you do go to sell your home, or even talking to friends and neighbors. And feel free to do that as well. The changes came about as a result of a lawsuit that was filed in the Midwest. And if I'm moving too far for the camera, let me know. I'll stay in one place. But there was a lawsuit, class action suit, that basically accused the real estate industry of price fixing. And they settled that suit without admitting right or wrong, but they settled that suit and agreed to change some of the rules. The heart of the matter was about what realtors are paid. And most realtors, most of you know, are paid in the 5 to 6% range of the entire transaction. But in most cases, the seller traditionally has paid both sides. So if it was 6, it was 3 here, 3 there, but they're not necessarily the same. They could be, a different split. And what people perhaps didn't realize, and what the government was trying to make a point of, is that the commission has always been negotiable. But people didn't always negotiate, and they weren't always aware of it. Sometimes people would be approached by a realtor, they'd be talking to a realtor, they knew the realtor, they'd done business before, maybe it's a neighbor's realtor, and they say, how much do you charge? Well, we charge 5%. And let's sign here, and we give 2.5% to the buyer and 2.5% to you. Or it could be 3 and 2, or the right thing to have done was to say it's negotiable. But in most cases, this is what it is, perhaps, and even that came into question. So without admitting fault, the NAR, the National Association of Realtors, settled. So they wrote a big check and they agreed to change some rules. And some lawyers went home with, I don't know, somewhere around $250 million. So obviously they had some motivation to do this. And they were careful to bring it up in the Midwest because in that particular state, it was clearer that that was borderline illegal activity. So they didn't admit that there was price fixing, but they agreed to change the rules. Now, one of the reasons that they paid both sides was to make it simple for the buyers. When you're selling a home, obviously there's two parties, the seller and the buyer. And the buyers are often first-time home buyers, they're often naive, and they're often scraping up the money, especially these days, to come up with a deposit. So for them to pay their own realtor is a burden. Rather than do that, the sellers, and through the wisdom of the National Association of Realtors, said, well, we'll have the listing broker collect the money for both sides and pay the buyer's broker. The buyer won't have to come up with the money. And it facilitated the transaction. Well, it sounds good in theory, but one of the results of that is the buyers were, in a way, inconvenienced, compromised, however you want to put it. It made it harder for the buyers to buy a home because now they needed even more money than the deposit. All right? So there are ways around that, potentially, legal ways, but the other major thing that came out of the suit is that listing agents and brokers are no longer allowed to advertise buyer compensation on MLS. Who wants to shout out what MLS is? Any?
Listing service.
Yes, ma'am. Multiple listing service. Thank you. So multiple listing service is where your realtor puts up all the information about your house and all those pretty pictures, and that gets syndicated throughout the internet. So that's where Zillow, Realtor.com, Trulia, all those people get the same pictures from one source. That source is the MLS, or Multiple Listing Service. And NAR, the National Association of Realtors, kind of helped facilitate all that. And it worked well for about 100 years, till the government and the lawyers got involved, and then boom, everything's a little bit confusing. So let's try to unconfuse you today. Are there any questions so far? I like this to be interactive. Happy to take questions at any time. Okay, well, let me move along then. So what we want you to do is have confidence when selling your home, tell you about the NAR settlement, And it's a potential way to lower your cost when you sell your home. Because one of the costs is, generally it's speaking, in the 5-6% range for realty fees. You can potentially not pay the buyer's side, and that's perfectly fine, but it always was fine. That's what people don't really understand. Okay. And we want, it makes comparison of costs more difficult for the buyer and for the seller. So we're going to try to help unconfuse that confusion. So I've kind of got ahead of myself, and I've already explained part of this screen. So again, listing realtors are no longer allowed to advertise compensation on MLS. So what happens? Now if the buyer wants to know, and there's other things that change, by the way, I'll get to those in a few minutes. If the buyer or the buyer agent wants to know, is the seller going to pay us? Or is he going to say, I, the buyer agent want to get paid. My buyer doesn't want to come up with the money. Is the seller offering any money? Well, I used to look on MLS. I guess I have to call the listing realtor now. So that's what happens. In most cases, they call the listing realtor and say, is there compensation? How much? They have a conversation. That's one way that they find out. But it creates confusion and complexity. And in some cases, it reduces showings because of one other thing I'm going to mention in a minute. But especially first-time home buyers are sometimes priced out of homes because they might have to come up with 2 or 3% for their representation. I'm going to talk about representation for a minute. I think it's on the next slide because it's important. But first of all, let me just compare here before the new rules and after. We've kind of been over this. Most sellers offered 5 or 6%, and they got that. They committed to that through a listing contract with the sellers. The sellers spelled out the commission for both sides. It went on MLS, and then the buyers could view your home without signing anything. So I'm going to pause for a minute and explain now, as part of the rules, the government, again in their infinite wisdom, wants the buyer to understand what their costs are in advance and the seller. So now they want the seller or the buyer to sign a piece of paper spelling out what the commission is before they even look at the house. Well, a lot of buyers are a little reluctant. You know, somebody puts a big long piece of paper or a short piece of paper in front of you that says sign here, it's no obligation, but in this case there was an obligation because if the seller didn't pay the commission, the buyer might have to pay. I'm not going to get into today all those complexities, but there are new forms to list a home, new forms to offer to buy a home, new forms for the buyer, and one of those forms is this, spells out the buyer's commission, and some of them are reluctant because of that. So recently, actual showings have dropped. And we used to do a lot of individual showings. They call them accompanied showings, especially on more expensive homes, instead of an open house. Well, now attendance of those have dropped somewhat, and open houses are again more popular because at open house you don't have to sign anything. Again, a detail, but this is what's going on. I'm going to summarize at the end and make it fairly simple for you, by the way, in terms of what you have to decide. So after the new rules, now MLS doesn't show it. As before, sellers can choose, but some may opt out of paying buyer compensation at all, and that'll put a burden and confusion on the buyer and will impact some buyers. Unfortunately, the less fortunate buyers, the less wealthy buyers, and the first-time buyers will be impacted the most, and that was not the intention. The intention of the government was to protect them, but they're also causing them to have an extra financial burden, and now they're asked to sign ahead of time. So, moving right along here. This talks about why MLS is important. We've been over that a little bit. It distributes all the information so that people come to get your home. When you're listing a home, there's really 2 or 3 things that matter the most. First is exposure. You want your home to get exposed to the biggest pool of buyers possible so that you get the most visitors possible. MLS did that and facilitated that. So you do want to be on MLS, although you can sell a house by yourself. That's called a FSBO. Everybody knows what that is, I hope. For sale by owner. You can still do that. Even that's more confusing now. But MLS distributes it. Now, the proposed changes disrupt the status quo. It's a disruptor type of thing. Like Amazon disrupted a lot of retail. Staples disrupted the office supply business. Well, this is changing the status quo. The status quo was, well, we've already described it, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But this is a disruptor, so it is big news, and that's why it's on the news. But sellers always had the right to pick their compensation, just that people didn't know that. So, some people wonder, why do I need an agent in the first place? Why can't I sell it myself? Well, on the seller's side, it's because of exposure. Because MLS is an organization, the internet's big now, and how are you going to get it on there by yourself and get it to all those different sites? You need exposure, so it makes sense to do it that way. There are complex legal forms that you need to protect yourselves and your money, so that's why. A lot of the reasons come under the heading of fiduciary. A real estate agent is a fiduciary. When you're a listing agent, we represent you only. We represent the seller, okay? And so we have a fiduciary responsibility to only influence your side. We have to tell the truth. We have to tell sellers and their realtors what's going on with the house to the extent that we know it. And we have to be fair, but we don't have to tell them, for instance, if there's been an offer on your house. That's up to you to tell me whether or not I can say there's an offer or not. That's a discussion we would have when we're selling your house. How much information do you want to share with the buy side? But a fiduciary responsibility, just like a lawyer has one, or your stockbroker has a fiduciary responsibility to you, as a listing agent, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the lister, and the buyer has a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer. So without the new paperwork and without somebody paying for that buyer's agent, the buyer's at a disadvantage because they don't have a fiduciary working for them. So on the other side there, for working for a buyer, the buyer accepts responsibility and promises confidentiality about the buyer. The buyer tells a lot of information, and part of that is communicated through a pre-approval letter, which they have a confidential discussion with their loan officer about. Again, I used to be a loan officer. I know all about that. And certain things are off limits. If they say, well, how much does the buyer make? Well, the buyer's agent's not supposed to tell that unless they've been authorized. But can they afford the house? Well, here's the pre-approval letter. It says that they can. But that has its own set of problems. And I might go off on a tangent in a few minutes about that, but I want to stick to our timeline. But some pre-approval letters are really not worth the paper they're written on because the person who wrote it perhaps didn't collect the docs. It all says, you can afford it subject to this, but we need to verify the information. So as a listing agent, you present an offer. I want to know what that buyer's agent knows about that buyer's qualifications. And I even call the person who wrote the letter. And I say, I know you don't have to talk to me, but my seller wants to be sure this deal's going to go through. I used to be a loan officer. What keeps you up at night about this loan? Is it close? Are the ratios tight? Are they self-employed? Questions like that. If they're self-employed, you have to collect 2 years of tax returns. Those can be complex to analyze. Did you do that? Are they self-employed? He says, no. Some will say, no, we wait to the end till they have an offer, and that's a problem. Who here has heard about a deal blowing up at the end? Anybody heard about that through a friend? Come on, give me a wave of hand here or something. I see some smiles out there. Well, the reason that happens is that the underwriters who really approve the loan don't really look at the loan until the end. And the reason for that is multiple multifaceted. For one thing, they have a stack of paper here, and a stack of paper here, and a stack of paper here, and those are all pending loans. And they rely on that loan officer to do the profile and say, does it fit our approval rules? But then they don't even touch the file until the appraisal's in. So if the appraisal comes in low, that could be a problem, but that's one of the reasons they don't get to look, the approver doesn't look at the file and do the approving until the end, because they have to collect all these docs. So, it's a complicated process, and that's why you need a fiduciary. And buyers need somebody that accepts responsibility and produces and promises confidentiality, anticipates needs, focuses on outcomes. Let's not forget, even though the process can be complex, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to sell a house. So that's focusing on on outcomes, and a good buyer agent will educate that first-time home buyer in particular about the whole process. And that's why you need a pre-approval letter. That's why you want to inspect the house to find out if there's problems. And that's why you want to have an agent who's going to give you some guidance on how much to offer. You've heard of multiple offers. That happens a lot as well. Lately it's happening less, and I'll talk about market conditions a little bit in the end. But by the way, this is a very good time to be selling your house. So out there in TV land, if you're wondering about should I sell or not, I would say it's a very good time to consider it because of market cycles and because it appears that we're near a market top. And with the election and everything else coming, there's a lot of uncertainty, let's say, that you'll avoid if you take the money now while the prices are high. Okay, we're seeing fewer and fewer multiple offer situations, which is its own set of questions and skills and so forth. So a buyer agent interprets and advises data and information for the buyer and helps them come up with a price for the house, because the seller might be trying for the high side. Maybe they've heard about things down the street that sold for a lot of money. Well, that may not be in the same condition as the house you're looking at. So what we try to do, whether we're advising a buyer or a seller, is to analyze comparative sales. Comparative sales. That's the indicator to us of, is this house priced appropriately? And the common denominator to comparative sales is a few, but price per square foot is one of the common denominators we need. So we draw a circle around your house, we get what's sold recently, we get them all on a list, MLS got them all there, it analyzes it for us and provides a comparative, and we look at the price per square foot for this versus that neighbor's house down the street. Then we look at the pictures and we decide, is it of similar condition? Does the price per square foot include a basement? Well, then the basement doesn't count as much on a price per square foot basis as the upstairs. So there's a lot that goes into it. I'm not going to try to explain too much here. We're on one topic, but that's why a buyer agent earns their commission and why a seller agent earns their commission. But the other big factor that you need to keep in mind is net to you. What's the net proceeds when it's all over? How much are you going to get for the house? And after you pay your mortgage, by the way, if you still have one, I bet some of you don't, how much is going to go in my pocket? So that's why buyers need agents, that's why sellers need agents, but at the bottom, the real thing is, so the deal goes through. That's the most important thing. We're selling a house, we want the deal to go through. If the buyers didn't get qualified properly, it's not going to go through. You're not going to know it till the end. If the seller prices it too high, you're not going to get the traffic. If the seller prices it too low, guess what usually happens in a vibrant market? The market corrects. That's why you'll see multiple offers, because if you price it too low and the market's active, then all those people that are looking are going to say, let's go. Let's put an offer in. They're going to talk to their agent, and a lot of times they start over asking, but that's another whole story as to how to be a good buyer agent and so forth, and how to field all those offers and how to price and be a good listing agent. I'm just going to pause for one moment, and tell you that don't lose track of the fact that these people work for you. The listing agent, I'm a listing agent, I work for you. It's your house. If you want to put in a high price and I think it's ridiculous, I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, I don't think I can take on this project because I don't think you're going to get near to that price. And if a buyer, the buyers are a different story. I'm primarily a listing agent. So I'm just going to say that. If you ask me what should the price be, I'm going to do an analysis for you. I'm going to show you comparative sales in the area. I'm going to say, look, here's the top 3 or 4 houses that are in the same condition, of about the same size, with about the same amenities, like numbers of bedrooms, numbers of baths. Garages are a big deal. If you don't have a garage, you got to price it down a little bit. If you don't have a powder room or something on the first floor and you got to go upstairs to use the bathroom, that's an issue. So we look at those kinds of things and we give you guidance. But ultimately, I'm working for you, it's your house, you decide, and the same thing happens when it comes to accepting an offer. I didn't cover one thing about those offers that I'm going to mention in a minute. So on to the next slide. Okay. Sorry for the pause there. Okay. This is the impact all of this has on the buyers. It's kind of a recap, but I'll just try to go through it quickly. Buyers with low funds could be priced out of your house if you as the seller don't pay for the buyer. You still have that option to pay. This is a good time to mention the other thing I can say, is even if you don't want to pay, we'll get to how the paperwork works in a minute. The buyer agent can write into the offer, we'll pay $500,000 for your house, and we want you to pay me, the buyer agent, 2%. You can agree or not agree, but that's what's starting to happen now because it's not published. You used to look on MLS and you know there was 2%. Nothing to argue about, nothing to worry about. Now that they can write that in, another level of complexity. But the impact on the buyers is that buyers' low deposit might be priced out, and there are usually 3 to 5% is usually the amount people paid for sellers paid for both sides of the transaction, but there are a lot of first-time homebuyer programs that are in the same 3 to 5% range. So my point in putting this out is, if a buyer has to come up with 2.5% real estate commission, they might have to come up with $15,000, $20,000, and that's almost the same as the deposit on the house. So it can double the money they need to put in. This is why it's advantageous in most cases for the seller to cover that, because really, even if you're paying it, who's really paying it? The buyer's paying it, and the buyer's bank is paying it. And that's one of the conclusions I want to give you at the end here, because it's coming out of your proceeds. If your house is worth $500,000 and you're giving away 5%, you're going to get, not giving away, but paying 5%, 2.5 to each side, you're going to get $575. So you need to focus on, I'm going to get $575 out of my $500,000. If I really want $500,000, I got to price it at 5.25 or higher. So, some thinking goes into it, but also we want to make it easy for the buyer. You don't want to discourage the buyer. You want to get easy for them to pay. So that's the impact on the buyers. The impact on offers is some buyers can represent themselves and come up and here's an offer for my home. Then you really got to wonder, do they know what they're doing? Because they might say, and you don't have to pay me a commission because I'm the buyer. Well, that could happen, but then you got to wonder, do they have the money? Are they telling me the truth? Do they have a pre-approval letter? You want to be represented by an agent, that's my advice at least to you, is you want both sides to have a fiduciary and both sides to have a lawyer, because they take over once the offer is accepted. So some of them do write it into the offer. Something like, this offer is contingent upon the seller paying this % to the buyer's agent, the second item in the middle column. But comparing offers, therefore, is more difficult. We give you either a net sheet or a side-by-side comparison. If you've got 5 offers, I'm going to put them down there, who's got a pre-approval, who doesn't, what the commission is, what's going to go in your pocket at the end if you accept offer A, B, or C. And I'm going to tell you, I'm worried about this one for this reason or that reason, or I'm not worried about this one for this reason or that reason. And if I talk to the bank, the buyer's bank, and some buyers might be priced out, so we mentioned that. So the impact on the seller is you're going to be asked to how much you want to pay, and you need to commit to the listing agent at least what they're going to get paid in writing, and it's a contract. You know, I want to sell my house for $800,000. I'll give you 3%, 2.5%, or I'll cover both sides. Now, even if they're willing to pay, you're willing to pay, then the question is, do we want to advertise that or not? Can't put on MLS. What do you want to do it? It becomes a whole discussion. I'm not going to get too complete. I'll start repeating myself. But in the case of FSBO, it's even more confusing. Again, the for sale by owner. So we are almost done here. This is the summary page, basically, or the second to last page. Do this. You want to think about this stuff in advance, and I commend you all for attending the seminar, and thank you for attending, because you need to protect yourself. Part of the protection is to hire an experienced listing agent and go through this slowly as it pertains to your situation. I'm happy to come and meet with you individually, even if you're not ready to list, as long as it's within the next year or two that you're thinking about potentially, and I come anyway just to give you some advice, but that's what we do. We work with people sometimes a year in advance and say, okay, here's the downsizing stuff. Let's not talk about price because you're not going to sell for a year, but let's talk about the process and what it might be like and so forth. And then if you decide to sign up with us, we come back and can help you organize it and everything. Otherwise, there's no obligation for a consultation. Okay, so protect yourself by getting an experienced listing agent. Don't forget that owners should be the one to decide how much they want to pay the listing agent and how much they want to pay the buyer's agent. It's your house. Don't be bullied by agents to say, don't worry about it. I'd sell more houses in Holliston than anybody. That's not what counts. How are you being treated as a customer? That's really important. I think you got to think about that and work with a realtor you're comfortable with. And as an unrepresented seller, if you go that route, you're going to be asked all these compensation questions. That's why I don't think you should do that. So do those three things, you'll protect yourself. Protect your time. Realtors, by hiring a realtor, you're going to save a lot of time. And wondering about some of these questions that will come up. Okay, in the case of a FSBO, you'll be taking calls from realtors and agents saying how much you're going to pay. It can be a confusing mess. Don't forget, a lot of buyers agents now are writing it in to their offer. Here's how much I want. Okay, and that's still negotiable. You can negotiate and say, I'll take the offer, but I want to pay you this. However, here's another good tip. When you get that offer, if you change anything, it invalidates the offer. They can say, no, I don't want to do that. You know, if they say, I want 5%, I want 3%, I only want to pay 2%, well, then you've basically said, I reject your offer. Here's a counter offer at 2%. Well, that's okay too, but understand that that offer is no longer valid unless you sign it as it is. But that's okay. It's your house. Do it. Do it through your agent. Talk it over. If it's your only offer, think about a way to make it work. If it's close enough on the price. Okay, maximize results. I think we've been over this enough. I don't want to get repetitive. I think rely on your listing agent's advice, but you make the decision. And don't forget that the condition of your home will influence those decisions, and so will local market conditions. In my next seminar, which is a month here from now or so at the Holliston Senior Center, it's on their website, I'm sure, we talk about how to price your house and what influences it and the condition of the house and what to fix and what not to fix before selling your house. That's a whole other topic, but I'll give you the best tip there is don't spend a lot of money fixing it up. Don't remodel the bad bathrooms and kitchen and so forth. The new person will probably want to do that if it needs it. The one thing I would tell you to do is remove an eyesore that will be obvious to a buyer and will make the condition of that part of the house similar to the rest of the house. Example, if your rug is beat as you enter and the front door is peeling, then sure, paint the front door and change that rug if the rest of the house is okay. But you know, if it's a hoarding situation and the house is full of stuff and the bushes are overgrown and there's an old swing set in the backyard that hasn't moved in forever, then sell it as is. And that's another whole topic, but that's, you know, those guys that say, we buy ugly houses? Well, that's what they do. They buy it as is, you take what you want and walk away. And that's something you can do with a listing agent also as well. You can put up a sale and say, buyer must empty the remaining contents of the house. People don't tell you that, but that's okay. And we do that sometimes because we sometimes flip houses and but we tell you that up front. Or we have contractors that will take it as is. So in summary here, what you really need is somebody that's going to tell you the whole story. You know, there's another form that we've always had to sign that says, am I here to list this is the summary page. Am I representing you as a seller or a buyer? Well, if you've got what they call an ugly house, or you know someone with a house like that, and I'm potentially a buyer, on the first visit, I'm going to say, I need to have you ask you to sign this piece of paper. This happens on every visit. I just want to tell you one other rule here. There's a piece of paper called a mandatory disclosure that the Commonwealth has to protect you as the buyer or the seller, and it's very valid. That's one thing I agree with. And it says, I'm here today to represent you as a seller or as a buyer, and we'd like you to sign that, but you don't even have to sign it, but I have to present it. When I meet with a person in their home or on a particular house, whether they're buyer or seller, I have to present a piece of paper that says I'm working for you, or I'm working for the seller, or I'm just advising, so that you know ahead of time. So if I'm considering buying your house, I would be a buyer until I was a seller, and then I'd ask you to sign it again. Little detail here, but I say these things to protect you, and so you know that you're the boss, and you should get full disclosure from whomever you're working with if they're representing you, if their fiduciary responsibility is representing you. So I'm going to ask for questions one more time. We're right on time here. Selling a home is one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your life, so obviously you need to pay attention. These changes, these new rules make it more time consuming and confusing for both sides. If you hire a listing realtor, it will save you time, save you money, and protect your most valuable investment. Paying for a buyer's realtor may still be the best choice for most, and I'm happy to take questions. But doing it the old way will simplify things quite a bit. And there's one more thing I don't want to get into too much detail. Listing on MLS guarantees the widest exposure. We've been over that, but it syndicates it to hundreds of websites, and therefore you're going to get more visitors, or at least more exposure. More people are going to look at your house if you list it with a realtor and get it on MLS. Sell Mom's House, my company. I've got a team of about eight people that work with me in various geographies, so we cover all of Central Mass and all the way into Boston. And we offer free downsizing advice and move management assistance when you list your home with us, and consultations are free. So if you're take away my literature here, you can call me on my cell phone, 774-696-6124. I'm going to mention that one more time, 774-696-6124 is my cell phone number, and I'm happy to give a free consultation on the phone or in person about your particular situation, and also to talk about downsizing. So I appreciate everybody here who attended and everybody who's watching through Holliston Hub HCAT. And I'm open for questions. But thank you all for attending. And again, my name is David Dowd. I'm with Keller Williams Real Estate, located right here on Route 9 in Framingham. And my number is 774-696-6124.